Howdy folks, old Buster coming to you again. Got another story. I kind of realized maybe all these stories are not maybe in chronological order. I've written a lot of them out of sequence, so maybe you can put them together, the characters together. But we're coming pretty close to putting one out about how the Presidential Corps came together and all that cast of characters. And I'll do that a little later on when I finish these. Duty. Gaspar Rene Renault, like Renault, wasn't his name, and he come from France by way of a route unknown, but he was a knocking on Buster's door. Now, Buster's grandma answered the door, and he told her he wanted to see Buster and both of his grandparents. When he got on to the house, he asked if he could call up Walter, Jesse Hyde, and their folks. Well, Grandpa Gus was right curious about all these doings and queried the feller some about it. Well, Gaspar said it was some kind of important, and he would be so kind to let him explain it to all of them at one time. Well, Grandpa Gus allowed that to be all right. They just waited a spell till everybody got there. Well, Grandma offered Gaspar some coffee and then began to fixing up refreshments for everybody a-coming. The first to arrive was Jesse and his ma and pa. Now, Jesse's pa was just happened to be in early from running the pipeline where he worked for Southern Natural Gas, and Jesse's Uncle Cecil was with his pa. Now, Uncle Cecil also worked for Southern Natural Gas, and he was in town for the company to help with his pa on the pipeline inspection. Well, next to come in was hired people, his folk. His pa was working on a project with his backhoe and dump truck and quit early because of wet ground after a shower where they was working. The last of the bunch to get there was Walter and his ma and pa. Now, Walter and his pa done welding for extra cash and ranched and farmed too, so chores had to be done before they left out to Buster's. Now, after all of them was gathered around, Gaspar pulled out a letter and some kind of credentials with a badge of some kind, of sorts. He told them this was a matter of national security and top secret, and he had to ask them all for their word never to reveal what was said or going on or what was going to happen. Well, everybody was plumb goggle-eyed over that, I tell you. Ain't nothing like this ever come their way before, but they all said they'd not never tell their soul. Well, first of all, Gaspar told Walter and his ma and pa that Walter's Uncle Jeff, which was his and ma's very own brother, was up to his neck in this thing. Well, right off they know this was serious business and really was important since Uncle Jeff was in on it. Well, then Gaspar told all of them if they remembered the fellers Dalton and Devane. Well, with eyes a-popping, they said, well, sure enough. Now, this had to be a doozy if those boys was involved. Well, Jesse's ma asked Gaspar if this would be dangerous. Well, Gaspar said it would, but he really needed their help on this here problem. It was life or death, and if there was any other way, he wouldn't ask for their help. Well, he said since Cecil was there, he could help Jesse's pa. It would be fixed so they could leave town and a cover story be made up by Sonat for them. Fact is, it was probably better since Cecil was there to help. It would look more like it was real. Now, Hyde's pa was to go along with them with Walter's pa to look to the evacuating or excavating, I guess, and welding. Well, the questions began to come in right and left in about that time, but Gaspar said it would get it all out if they would just wait a bit. Well, Gaspar said that Dalton and Devane would meet up with the boys, and since Walter was Uncle Jeff's nephew, the plan they hatched out ought to work out fine. If things did go wrong, the boys would be protected 6 ways from Sunday and got out of the line of fire before they got hurt. Well, next off, Gaspar commenced to reading the letter he brung with him to all the folks and the boys. Now, the letter was from Hiram Holmes, Director of Operations for the Presidential Corps, Special Envoy for the President of the United States. Mr. Holmes said this was a matter of the most seriousness and asked for all their help. They had all kinds of operatives and other folks at their disposal, but this was special like. With all the boys knowing Dalton and Devane and having a history of sorts with them, and Walter being Uncle Jeff's nephew, it was a perfect fit for the mission. It also was a personal thing for Walter's ma and pa, as they were kin and knowed things about Jeff nobody else knowed. The mission was twofold: saving Uncle Jeff's life and saving of the U.S. of A. There was a pipeline being constructed from Cayenne, French Guiana to Medellin, Colombia, a distance of 1,607 miles. The pipeline was to meet up with the Pan American Highway at Medellin and travel to Monterrey, Mexico, 2,113 miles away. Then from Monterrey to Harlingen, Texas, another 167 miles. Now, the pipeline was the conduit for the greatest terrorist threat the U.S. had ever known. Now, you would have thought that this was too elaborate a plot for them ragheads, but you know, you's all wrong there. True enough, the simpler the better, but in this here case, somebody else had a hand in this diabolical plan. The pig farmers and the chinks got away ahead of themselves this time, because their scheming and plotting plumb got away from them. Others with a totally different agenda was using all of them as puppets for their own purposes. I tell you, simple. They wanted total control over the world and all your money to boot. Age-old story, ain't it? But this time they come from different directions to achieve their goals. All this cooperating and sharing technology and generally trying to apologize for being a rich and benevolent society had done got the U.S. in a pickle. 'Tweren't so much just one thing, but several contributing factors. Apathy of folks in the U.S., politicians that usurped the power from the people, the breakdown of the moral fiber of the people, starting with the family, and the most important aspect of it was leaving God and Jesus out of the whole shebang. Plain and simple. I reckon folks just wasn't reading their Bibles enough anymore, said Jesse's ma. Walter's ma sure seconded that statement, and the rest of the boys' folks agreed. The gist of how they was going to do it was found out by Walter's Uncle Jeff. Now, this was while he was doing his scouting around and doing the job for the government. Now, Earl was just the ticket to get the job done for him. That and peanut butter. Peanut butter, hollered out Walter. What in the world does peanut butter have to do with anything, he asked. Well, come to find out, it was something about peanut oil and crude oil both being organic and them being combined with some other additive, sure enough throwed a monkey wrench into the works. The other additive was the fly in the ointment, and it come from Africa. It was the devil's claw plant from the Kalahari Desert, one of the rarest plants in the world. 2 chemicals, iridoid glycosides, harpagicide and harbigide, are used in treating arthritis and other conditions and blood diseases, and is the catalyst that makes it all work. Hairy root is an infectious plant disease caused by the soil bacteria. Agrobacterium rhizogenes, and it is at the core of the new technique that has led to biofactories that produce medicines derived from rare plants in huge quantities at low cost. Now, boy, I know that's a mouthful. Well, this guy, Milenai Grigoriev, this scientist, he's a Russian guy. They had a lot to do with it. But they discovered some of this stuff, and took these plants' roots, infected them with this stuff. And so they're trying to make medicines and these medicinal chemicals. But what ain't said is they done discovered that by altering the DNA of the plant, it extracts mutants. It's mutated. It causes a reaction in combination with crude oil and peanut oil that's the most deadly poison ever produced. You just add a little heat like burning gas or diesel in a motor and it instantly kills. It ain't no antidote neither. Wearing a respirator is the only way to beat the dang stuff, but it dissipates in seconds. Fact is, if you could hold your breath for 25 seconds, you could live through it. when it was getting on you. Now this mutation is being made in one of them biofactories in Senegal and shipped out at Dakar to Cayenne, French Guiana. The mutation extracts be added into the pipeline there at Cayenne when they begin to send in the mixture of crude oil and peanut oil to Medellin, where it is to be trucked on to Monterey and Harlingen. The crude oil and peanut oil is also mixed at the biofactory, but the extraction is added at a later date due to its short lifespan. It must be activated within 72 hours or it becomes inert. In other words, it don't bother you. Well, Uncle Jeff done stumbled into the operation in Senegal and is held at the biofactory. And Dalton and Devane are going to get him out and stop that extraction from the devil's claw from being injected into the oil. Now, with the help of all the boys and their pals, they figured to get her done, because if and they don't, it would be a cakewalk to take over the U.S. of A. after killing lots of folks. Well, Gaspar said Mr. Holmes figured that the Bilderberg bunch of Peckerwoods is the ones that doing all the mischief, and they just had to pay the price for treason and killing folks. Now, Mr. Holmes' letter gives some information to the boys and their folks so they would know what they was up against in the USA and personal as well. Well, this goes on to tell a lot about the Bilderberg junk, their outfit, and the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and all these people in there that had something to do with it. And that's why I tell you, y'all need to write me, Buster and Boys at yahoo.com. Anyway, too long to read right now. But with all that being said, Mr. Holmes said that we'll understand the reason for secrecy. You just can't trust folks that way, the way you used to, and that's why they always chose for the mission for their country. He thanked them all for their patriotism and loyalty and was proud to know such good folks as them. Well, Gaspar also said Mr. Holmes had all of the top scientists at his disposal working on something that would render the extract useless. He hoped they could find something before it was too late. Well, Gaspar told Buster's Grandpa Gus and Grandma they wouldn't be needed because of their age. Now, Grandpa Gus had sure enough hissy fit over that, I tell you. He told Gaspar right quick he done fought in World War I, and he wasn't going to let some communist bunch take over his country, not on your life. And if Buster was going to go, so was he, in the conversation. And Grandpa Gus was, he was heck to be dealt with now. Well, Gaspar told them to sleep on everything that was said that evening, and he'd be back tomorrow for the answer and any questions they had. He took his and leave, and out the door he went. Well, the next evening, old Gaspar come into Buster's house where all the boys and their folks were gathered up. Well, Gaspar asked them all if there was any question if they'd made a decision on going ahead with the plan. Well, Grandpa Gus said there was questions aplenty, but reckoned they couldn't get no more answers till they got in the middle of the fracas. Grandpa Gus said he didn't care one whit if anybody else went or not. He was a-going, period. That's Buster's grandpa, for real. All the boys' folks said they had plenty of questions, but no, Grandpa Gus said the right thing, and that they'd hashed it over last night and all day today. Well, then old Gaspar asked them if they accepted the mission to a person, and they all said yes. Well, Gaspar said there wouldn't be no communication with the women folk or anyone else till they come back, and they just might not come back. It was a chance they took. Well, they all said they knowed that, but this was about all their lives and freedom, and it just had to be done, even if it hair-lipped a ugly ape. Now, the women folk all told Gaspar they wanted him to take care of them boys for sure and bring their men folk home to them. Well, Gaspar said he would give his life to do that. And after Gaspar told the boys and the men folk to get ready and say their goodbyes, because they was leaving right then. Woo-wee! Grandma said, "You mean right now?" And Gaspar said, "Yes, ma'am, right now." There was a few tears and some hugging and a kissing, and then the men folk and the boys left with Gaspar and 2 black Ford Excursions with all the windows blacked out as well, armor-plated. The boys and Grandpa Gus and Gaspar went in one of Walter's, Paul and Jesse's Paul, Hyde's Paul went in the other. Well, Gaspar headed straight for the airport, and the other Ford went on to the Little Rock Air Force Base. Well, Gaspar was a-going with the boys and Grandpa Gus to Cayenne, French Guiana. The boys was a-going as exchange students for agriculture, and Grandpa Gus was a-going as a chaperone, but was to teach about planting rice and water. Now, Grandpa Gus was the first one to plant rice and water, like the Chinese in the South, so he had his reputation and his reason to be working on with the farmers, the local farmers. Well, Gaspar was the French liaison for the educational program for his government, and all this looked like it was on the up and up, you know. Well, Big Jim Holmes, now he ain't kin to Hiram Holmes, but they got the same name. But Big Jim Hired's pa, Dubs, Walter's pa, and Mac, Jesse's pa, was took on an Air Force military flight to Medellin, Colombia, as private contractors for the pipeline that the U.S. government loaned to the project. Now they was to inspect and advise on the pipeline, but was really trying to find out how and when that extract was going to be put in. What the boys didn't know was that Weldon was to set off the Pison after the batch was on its way to the United States and other locations. Then the Pison was going to take out in South and Central America too. Well, Big Jim, Mac, and Dubs all know they had a whale of a job in front of them and were prepared to go the distance to do it. Each of them swore to take care of the other's family if something happened to them all, and had a hankering had to get on with it. Their briefing was coming the next morning at 0700 hours by a feller from Mr. Holmes' outfit. Well, Gaspar had the boys meet up with a professor from the university. Now wait a minute here. Now you know I can't speak these French words. Basically, it was the University of Antilles at Cayenne in French Guiana, or something like that. Yeah. Well, here's something I can help tell you. In English, it was the University of the French West Indies in Guyana, Campus St. Denis. Well, anyway, that's where the boys would be staying for a spell. All their papers and money was provided by students, as students by Gaspar. The boys was to get ready to take a little trip to Dakar, Senegal, on Cape Verde Peninsula after poking around and exploring Cayenne. If they could find out any information that would help their paws or the fellers who are working for Mr. Holmes, it would sure help out a heap. Well, when they get to Dakar, they was to locate where they had Uncle Jeff hid out. Reckon it would be a wonder if he wasn't dead by now, though. Well, Jim was a digging and a placing pipe, and Dubs was a welding them, or at least showing them how to weld and working how to do it and what to look for. And Mike and Cecil was helping inspect the pipe to make sure it was installed right and would hold the oil. Well, Mike and Cecil was to help inspect the whole 1,607 mile pipeline by any means necessary, along with some engineers. They was going to use ATVs, four-wheel drives, horseback, plane equipped with detection hardware, cameras, and just plain walking. Them two had a dickens of a job, but it was necessary to inform the others where a break could be made in the pipe undetected. They was to encounter critters and snakes and such that they ain't never seen before, and hope them local engineers knowed a thing or two about what they could expect. The local fellers round there done told them to look out for that little golden frog and some kind of beetle, plus some bird what might be a pecking a feller. Oh me, Mac wasn't about to wander around in parts not knowing what all was out there and what he might have to tangle with, so he up and tells the feller heading up the inspection crew that he wanted to know what they was. Well, it weren't long before he got back with Mac and Cecil. Said one was a golden poison frog. The poison from the skin of the world's most poisonous known creature. He's tiny, about an inch and a half. They called him Phyllobates terribilis. It kills pert near anything but a snake. An average golden poison frog contains about 1 milligram of poison, which is enough to kill 10,000 mice and perhaps enough to kill 10 to 20 humans if the poison reaches their bloodstream. Well, This extraordinarily lethal poison is a steroid alkaloid called beta-traxatoxin. Almost does not occur in nature. The poison is only found among 3 poison frogs in Colombia. And the frog stores the poison in its skin glands, as poison frogs are perhaps the only creatures immune to the poison. The poison attacks the sodium channels of the cells, and the frog has evolved special sodium channels so that the poison can't harm them. Now the frog eats the same poison as his own, but produced by some other critter. Now that critter turns out to be a Melyride beetle. Wow, Melyridae. Some kind of beetle. Now the icing on the cake is a dang bird that eats them beetles is a patooey, but he has to fly in from New Guinea. Boy, I swear it's the truth. Researchers there. Well, the boys all got settled in and started to run some traps, get some information, if they could, on what was going on in Senegal and in the connection in Cayenne. Now, Gaspar give a lead or two, and it appears that some of the students was in on the deal, being radical at all. With them southern accents, the boys was quite the novelty, especially Buster and Jesse. They got in with the group at the local hangout after meeting up with them at the schoolhouse. There was a French gal named Manon that took a shine to Walter, and a local gal named Odette that was a bug-eyed overhired as could be. Well, Buster had a gal from Czechoslovakia named Hannah that cozied up to him, but Jesse got him a corker. Her name was Bibi. She was the bartender and tweren't associated none with any of the bunch. Reckon Jesse was putting them pheromones to good use right then, I tell you. Well, all of them decided to get something to eat and was just a visiting at this little cafe the gals knowed of that had real good local food. Well, Jesse and Bibi kind of stayed apart and to themselves, and she wasn't in the clique with the gals from the school. Well, after having a bite and a few drinks, the boys made up to see the gals the next day. Well, since it was a Sunday, they all was planning a little sightseeing and a picnic and then a picture show. Well, after a spell and a meandering along a stream in a park, Walter and Manning got to talking about politics and all, and she was quizzing him about coming from the U.S. to school here. Walter had him a cover story, as the rest of the boys did, and told her a yarn about his and folks was in the Earl business back at the house, but he had some different ideas about things and wanted to see how other folks lived. She said she understood and she felt the same way. In France, they had progressive ideas and open lifestyles, and she said she had to do something about the capitalist threat from the U.S. She said she understood the Muslims and leaned towards their way of thinking. Can you believe that? Wouldn't last long if she was over there because they don't treat women right. Now, she told Walter he was different from any Westerner she ever met, but knowed of a few that crossed over to their cause. Walter told her he appreciated the fact she understood him and would she introduce him to some of the folks in the movement. Walter could always sweet talk anybody, especially a woman. She said sure she would, and that after the picture show there was to be a late night meeting of their cell, and asked if Walter wanted to come along. Well, Walter told Manning that his and best friends was just like him in their way of thinking, and could they come? She didn't see no problem with that and told him to meet her at 10 p.m. at the Acropolis at Route D Cabasu City Center. Boy, they got some names in here. Seeing as how they had done got him an invite to the meeting, the boys didn't want to be late. They arrived early enough to get a ring-size seat and take some pictures for Gaspar. Well, Gaspar give each of the boys a locator to put on his in person and a phone like they had never heard of. If it rang, 'tweren't no sound, it just give you a feeling. 'Tweren't no vibration exactly, but this funny feeling, it was telling you the answer. The locator was in the shape of a different object. Now, Buster had a rabbit's foot. Jesse had a pen. Walter had a belt buckle, and Howard had a keychain with his and Paul's Dirt Company logo on it. Now the watch was just like the one Dick Tracy had in the funny papers back home. They each was give a bulova, excepting Walter had a pocket watch where the rest of the boys had wristwatches. You could talk on it and see their faces well. Now when it come to taking pictures, Walter was sure enough up for that, I'm telling you. That boy just dearly loved to take pictures, and so did Howard. As soon as he got settled in, he began to taking pictures of folks coming into the club. He must have took 200 of them, but didn't want to miss nobody, so's Gaspar could have them checked out to see if they was knowed to be up to no good or somebody knew they might have missed. Well, Gaspar said there just wasn't no telling who was in the cahoots in this deal. Well, at straight up 10 p.m., the boys went into the club. Walter spied Manning and hustled on over to where she was. She had him a table towards the back, and two fellers was a-sitting there with her. She said their names was Hans and Ivan, and they looked to be big enough to play in the NFL. Well, introductions was made, and they all confabbed and jawed for a spell and told Walter nice to meet him, whatnot, and Walter even took to a dancing with Manning. He broke into a Texas two-step, got that gal to catching on real quick on how to do it. While Walter was a-cutting the rug out there, and then he went to a dancing the schottisch. Well, all them folks was a-clapping and a-hollering for Walter and Manning, just loving watching them a-dancing. They ain't never seen no dancing like that before. When the music started for the next song, Manning pulled old Walter back onto the dance floor as he was heading back to the table. Now, Walter didn't know nothing about no zouk dancing, but he sure got a lesson right quick like. That's Z-O-U-K, zouk. He never seed such a gyration, but he said he was up for it. Them cowboy boots of his was like they was on fire. He really got into the dance when he got the hang of it, and them folks was a-hooping and a-hollering and a-clapping when him and Manning left the dance floor. He told the boys it was kind of like riding a bronc or a bull in the rodeo. Oh, me. Well, after a bit, the discussion come round innocent-like about the U.S. and Western countries and how bad they was. Well, the boys all knowed to play along with what Manning and them two fellers was a-saying, and all of them said they agreed with them, and that's why they come to school over here to see if they could do something about it, to get involved, you know, real involved. Well, when it struck midnight, Manning and Hans and Ivan asked the boys if they'd like to sit in on a meeting of their group. Well, heck yeah, they said. By that time, old Dad had come in, and her and Howard was a-sitting and talking real close and having a good time. Well, the meeting must have had 20 people there. Not a one of them over 25, except this one feller. He was a little bitty skinny feller that was bug-eyed and had teeth so that he could eat corn through a picket fence. He sure enough didn't fit in this group, I tell you. In the meeting, he was introduced to be a feller from Germany named Fritz Mengele, whoever he was. And Fritz told all the young folks they was to be called on to help in the cause real soon. And this was a big, big undertaking for the cause. Well, everybody there was a spewing talk of how bad the U.S. was and what had ought to be done about them. Said they deserved anything they dealt to them. Of course, the boys had to listen and go along with all that drivel and had to put on a show how they was put out with their country. And the meeting was over by 2 a.m. and everybody left. Well, Walter and Howard had to escort Manning and Odette back to the school where they stayed, but Buster and Jesse made up to follow Fritz when he left on out. Well, sure enough, Hans and Ivan was with Fritz. They followed him all the way back to the dock at the port. Well, there, Fritz and the two goons got on a tender and went out to a yacht in the harbor. Well, Buster and Jesse done some fast figuring and knowed they had to slip on out there and listen up to what was said. Well, they found a little boat with a trolling motor on it, and since it twerked far, eased on out to where the yacht was. Now, that little motor was electric in the water, and the water was calm, and it weren't no more than 200 yards out. So they went real quiet like and unseen. Well, when they got there, Buster grabbed a hold of a line off of the bow and told Jesse to shinny on up there and take a listen. Buster gave him a boost, and since he was the littlest of the bunch, it was easy for him to do that, and him not easy to spot neither made it even better. Well, Jesse got up close and overheard that there was a shipment coming in at the end of the month, and that was only a little over 2 weeks away. Fritz was talking to the two fellers, Hans and Ivan, telling them to get things in order with the group when a call come in on the ship to show a radio for him. Well, Jesse couldn't hear all the conversation with the person on the other end, but he got that the extract was going to be shipped on the last day of Carnival. It is always a Tuesday set by Easter on the first full moon. Well, Fritz told Hans to go back to town and see the things there and not to be drinking or smoking on the opium pipe. Well, Jesse skedaddled out of there and got in the boat with Buster, and they took off back to the dock. Well, after Buster pulled away from the yacht, Hans got in the tender and headed to the shore. Since Buster was going so slow, Hans began to overtake him. Now, Hans didn't see Jesse because he was blocked from view because of Buster's size, and it was pitch black. Now, Hans knew something was up and gave it the gas to catch Buster, but he was already at the dock. Jesse got on out and was on the other side of some containers when Hans run smack dab into Buster. And I kind of addled Buster, but didn't knock him out, but Hans was on him real fast. He done caught Buster on the head and laid him out proper. Now, Jesse couldn't do nothing until he got some help, but watched to see what he might be able to do, or what Hans was going to do to Buster. If and he could, he would whack the tar out of Hans and get Buster loose from him. Hans had the size of a gun, and Jesse didn't. Jesse wasn't no coward, no siree, but he had good sense and bided his time. Jesse watched Hans call in some fellers that looked like them Somalia pirates they talked about, and watched them put Buster in a boat of theirs that was tied up to the dock. Well, Hans told him not to hurt him none till he got back, because he had questions aplenty for Buster. But Jesse was on the phone quicker than a cat on a mouse calling Gaspar. Gaspar told Jesse that he was out in the jungle at the pipeline and couldn't get there for a spell, but would be there quick as he could and would get in touch with Jesse when he hit town. Well, the helicopter he had was refueling, and it would take the better part of 2 hours to get back to Cayenne. Jesse was close to Harry's bar where Beebe worked, so he run in there to use the phone to call Grandpa Gus. Well, Beebe seen that Jesse was all fractious and ditherated over something, so she let him be and give him her phone behind the bar to use. Now, she overheard just enough of Jesse's conversation with Grandpa Gus to know something was up, and she figured she knowed what it was. Well, Grandpa Gus said he'd be over to Harry's bar pronto, and he would be a-packing. They was a-going to get Buster come hell and high water, and them pirates was going to blister or bleed, and that's for sure. Ain't nobody going to hurt his boy whilst he was a-living. You know, Grandpa Gus is something. He was in the World War I. He was a boxer, had hands for hands, and he was a hurdler. He was in the Paris Games of 1917. He was much a man. He wasn't a big man, but he was much a man. And he had that bohemian temper, and I'm going to tell you now, he wasn't going to put up with nothing. But anyhow, Beebe told Jesse to step in the back and wanted to talk to him. She plumb done had Jesse's jaw drop to the floor with what she was a-telling him. Beebe was an operative with Gaspar and was to look out for the boys as well as spy on the bad guys. Now, she was a mite older than Jesse, but not that you would know. She said she would help too, and they would go after Buster when Grandpa Gus got there. Now, Beebe asked Jesse how many of them was there, and Jesse told her 6, but didn't know if any more was on the boat. Now, Beebe said she'd make a call to Gaspar and see if he had some of his men close by, but they didn't want to blow their cover. Beebe knowed where Hans would be a-going, so that wasn't a problem, and he had to be kept quiet about Jesse and Buster being out at the yacht. Well, Gaspar told Beebe he had 4 men a-working as night crew on a power plant in town, and he'd call and tell them to meet up with Beebe at the dock. Well, Grandpa Gus come in with fire in his eye, and mad as he was real calm like. Beebe explained what they had to do, and Grandpa Gus said to saddle up. By that time, Beebe, Jesse, and Grandpa Gus got to the docks. All the 4 men of Gaspar's had called, they'd made up to meet, and they met up there near the Somalian. It's some kind of Somalian pirate boat. Well, when they got there, they see 2 fellers on guard. 2 of the operatives of Gaspar sneaked up on them 2 Somalian guards, quiet-like, and took them out real easy. They the ones with the squished up head, long face or something. Muslimators. They sure was expert with a knife, Jesse told Grandpa Gus. Well, Grandpa Gus said they was special forces. Well, when Jesse, Beebe, Grandpa Gus, and the other 2 operatives boarded that old scow, they could hear a jabbering below decks. The locator in the rabbit's foot that Buster had on him told Beebe exactly where his position was below decks. The 4 of them pirates was a-whooping on Buster pretty bad. Well, Buster told them if that was all they got, they might as well quit, 'cause he wasn't saying nothing. There was 5 of them down there. 1 was a cook. Well, it wouldn't do if Grandpa Gus didn't go in first, and he sure enough did. He had that old Colt 45 of his and just a blasting. He could blast a 5-wire barbed wire fence with that 45. The rest of them come in behind Grandpa Gus, and it was one heck of a firefight. Well, it didn't take long till it was hand to hand with a couple of them fellers. Well, they run dry with their guns, the clips. They didn't have any more clips, any more ammunition, and they had to take it to hand night fighting. Them automatic rifles don't do so good with no ammo and for close-in fighting. Well, Jesse run to Buster amongst the melee and cut him loose, and Grandpa Gus could clip every strand like I tell you on a 5-strand barbed wire fence with that old 45 of his, and he sure put her to good use. He popped one feller dead between the eyes and shot the cook that had the cleaver with both knees and elbows being knocked out. He wasn't going to do no harm at all. Figured he might be useful for information if he didn't bleed out. Now the other pirates was either killed or fighting. That baby was a holy terror with that savant French fighting, and sure had Jesse all agog. Well, Buster'd come around when one of them pirates come up with a machete and was going to whack one of the operatives. Buster grabbed a hold of his neck and twisted her real good and snapped it like a twig. Old Buster was stout, and he was right riled after being whooped on like they done him. Well, all them pirates were graveyard dead, except the one Grandpa Gus shot up. And after all was said and done with, the operative said they would clean up the mess there and take that cook feller that was shot in both knees and elbows for interrogation. Nobody would ever know what happened here. The scow and the bodies would be took out to sea and sunk with no trace of them to be found. Now the next problem was old Hans. Now Beebe said she knew where he was in an opium den on the other side of town. Gaspar's men asked if they would need their help, but Beebe said they could handle that. There was a rundown old hotel that was used by the addicts and crooks there in Cayenne, where Hans went to smoke his opium pipe. There was a Russian the size of a tank there that run the place, but other than that, there wasn't no other help for Hans. On the way to get Hans, Gaspar called in, said to wait for him. He'd pick them all up out back of Harry's bar. Wasn't long, and here come Gaspar. He had a driver and got the rundown on what happened on the way to get Hans. Well, Gaspar took the lead, and when they got to the door, that big Russian commenced to get right sassy with, with old Gaspar. That sure didn't set with him, I tell you. Now, old Gaspar was a lean, mean fighting machine like you never ever seen. You just think you seen some rough housing in them karate movies. Telling you it was a sight, what he done to that feller, and in no time flat, it's hard to make a feller believe it. He tweren't dead, but he sure enough wished he was. ain't no telling how many bones was broke, plus being out cold was a blessing for him, as tore up as he was. Well, all of them went on in and found Hans lollygagging with some gal and smoking out their opium pipe. When he seed Buster, he come a-tearing up Jack to get to him. Well, Beebe give him a kick with a savate move and put him on his'n keister. Well, Buster said to let him be, 'cause he was his'n after Hans had give him a whooping like he done. Lord, folks, old Hans just didn't know what he was a-tangling with. Now, Grandpa Gus told the rest of them, and Jesse seconded that. Hans was a mite slow for the dope, but nothing seemed to hurt him none 'cause of it. He figured he could whoop this young whippersnapper nothing flat, but he had another thought coming. Buster was too fast, and especially for a feller his size. But Hans dope-pop Buster a good 'un, but that didn't even faze Buster nary a bit. Buster just grinned and worked old Hans over good and proper. Hans running, a good 260 pounds, and Buster picked him up over his head and slung him plumb across the room through a wall. Nails and pieces of board were stuck all in Hans every which a place, but Buster wasn't done with him yet. Buster grabbed his shirt front and lifted old Hans plumb off the ground with his feet a-dangling in the air. Then Buster wound up and landed a haymaker that you just knowed broke his jaw. Well, Hans was out cold for sure. Gaspar said they'd take care of old Hans and he wouldn't see the light of day ever again. Well, Gaspar told them all to go on back home and wait for his call next morning. Well, Beebe grabbed a hold of Jesse and told him how brave he was and smart too. If and it wasn't for his quick thinking, ain't no telling what would have happened to Buster, let alone the mission. Now, them Fairbones was a-working overtime all right, and Beebe up and kissed Jesse full on the mouth and didn't let him up for air till she was a-done kissing him neither. I'm telling you, them Fairbones was working overtime. Lord have mercy. Well, Beebe went on back to the bar where her scooter was, and the boys and Grandpa Gus went on back to the school. Well, Buster told Jesse to buck up and not to run off from Beebe or no other gal that got spelled by his pheromones. He just had to know he was doing his duty for his family and country. Well, heck, Jesse Buster said for the world and freedom. You just got to make the sacrifice, he said. Well, Jesse said to Buster that it was right pleasurable, and he reckoned them pheromones was wearing him down. Gosh, Friday. Oh, me. Well, Buster and Grandpa Gus had a chuckle over that, I can tell you. When they got back to the school, they had a settee with Hired and Walter and told them all what done happened. Well, Walter and Hired was busting at the seams to tell them they got a lead on the shipment that was coming in and where they was going to put in the extraction. Right where the pipeline was crossing the Saramacca River in Suriname. Well, the gals knowed they was going to do something big there, but didn't know exactly when. There was to be a boat come up river at night and put in the extraction. The welding was already done, and the tube to insert the extraction was well hid as the pipe went into the water. Well, Gaspar met up with the boys and Grandpa Gus the next morning, and everything was discussed and plans made. Now, Gaspar said everything was going along fine, and he was over to see Big Jim, Dubs, and Mac yesterday. That was why it took him so long to get on back. Well, the gals was right about an insertion point on the Saramacca River, but the menfolk found several others along the pipeline too. They neutralized all of them to where they couldn't be used. Well, Gaspar said those paws of the boys was fast and knowed their business. He said he didn't think it could be done, but they done it. Just had a few more miles of pipeline to go, and then they could go home. He said to a man they wasn't a-going till they all went, so he reckoned he would see how it all played out. They might be able to help put the bio factory out of commission and save Uncle Jeff yet. Well, Gaspar said to sit tight till plans for the operation in Senegal was made. Just lay low and act natural. Go to the meetings in the Harry's bar where Beebe was tending bar and keep their eyes peeled. Grandpa Gus be with Gaspar and doing some work with the local farmers for a few days, but if anything happened, just to call him or Beebe. Well, about that time a horn honked and Jesse looked out the window and there was Beebe on her scooter. All of them was a grinning from ear to ear when Walter said to Jesse, "Hold the line, just hold the line, Jesse." Well, Jesse lit out of there like his tail was on fire and hollered back to him that he was just doing his duty. Oh me. The date was April 6th for the extraction to be shipped. The first load of the mixture of crude oil and peanut oil was already en route to Cayenne, a distance of 2,470 miles. The crude oil come from Tripoli, Libya, and the other Middle Eastern oil producers with terrorist ties, and the peanut oil come from local growers in Senegal. The bio factory was located in the industrial district of Dakar at the docks. Pier 17 was the one that was used to dock the ships and carrying the oil mixtures. Now, each ship could carry up to 2 million barrels of oil. At least 50 million cars would be spewing poison that would kill untold millions of people in the North, Central, and South America. If the plan worked there, it would work anywhere else in the world, and total domination of the planet was assured. Now, Gaspar flew all the boys and Grandpa Gus to Dakar on a French airliner with diplomatic immunity as special emissaries. They all was a staying at the French embassy at 1 Rue El Hajj Amadou Hussein Nadoy. Why, don't get me to lying about this name. The French ambassador met them and told them all that they had his in full support. Well, when they arrived, they went into a conference room where Dalton and Devane was awaiting for them. Well, everybody said their howdies and commenced to bringing Dalton and Devane up to date on what happened in Cayenne. Well, Dalton said to the boys and Grandpa Gus that the players here was a mite different and played for keeps. They didn't need to take no chances and just to do as they was told and stay out of the way and not to be in any danger. Now, Devane said he and Dalton didn't want their blood on their hands but deeply appreciated their help. They knowed they could trust the boys and their pals and Grandpa Gus but not to take any unnecessary chances. Well, Dalton said they narrowed down where the bio factory was in Dakar, but the extraction was located in the city of Thies, that's Thies, 35 miles up Highway N3 from Dakar. The mutation could be shipped by rail on the Dakar-Niger River Railway or the Northern Railway or any of the road systems. Well, Uncle Jeff was thought to be held at the Buddy Bean Lumber Company under 24-hour guard. And it was also where the final stage was completed for the extraction process of the Devil's Claw. Well, Buster said to Dalton that if it was the same Buddy Bean from back home, he knowed he could sure enough get in there. Well, Buddy Bean has his in office in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he had knowed him since he was a pup. Well, Mr. Bean bought all the timber from Grandpa Gus when he cleared the old prison farm outside of Keogh. Grandpa Gus said to Dalton and Devane that Buddy Bean sure didn't know him right well, but didn't know he had holdings here in Senegal. Well, Gaspar told him that he bet that they could take down the whole operation in one fell swoop. If they brung Big Jim, Mac, and Dubs over to work with them to take down the bio factory, and Dalton and Devane and the boys to go to Thieves, they could wipe out the whole kit and caboodle if it was timed right. Well, they all agreed to make up a definite plan, and that was pure D luck that Buster and Grandpa Gus knowed Buddy Bean. Well, old Buddy might or might not be there, but whoever was could check out Buster and Grandpa Gus real easy like. Well, Buddy would surely know Grandpa Gus's reputation in farming, would think nothing of him helping the local farmers with their problem raising peanuts or other crops. It was also just natural that Buster would come along with him. Well, sir, the plan was finally put to rest, but some of it would just have to be played by ear. First off, Buster and Grandpa Gus would have to go to the lumber yard for a visit and to get the lay of the land and report back to Dalton. And after that was done, everything could go on according to plan. They all would commence to getting Uncle Jeff out of there alive and destroying the extract and the process equipment. And either capture or kill the scientist making it. Now Gaspar said he would fly Big Jim, Dubs, and Mac over as soon as possible. He'd leave Cecil with Beebe till they knowed what was what in the raid. They needed a man on the ground to help his men in a bad way. Boots on the ground was always the best way to see something done right. If any extract got in the pipeline, many a person would die. Well, during the planning and the plot, Gaspar got a call from some of his people that a shipment of oil done got to the pipeline was ready to be unloaded. Where in the world did it come from? They had no idea. All Gaspar and all the other operative knowed was that 2 ships was bound for Cayenne. Now Gaspar got on it hot and heavy. He called Beebe and told her to hook up with his men and get an answer from Hans, since he hadn't been dispatched yet, or kidnap Fritz and Ivan and make them talk. Well, old Fritz was a cagey one. He just moved from one place to another, and when Beebe finally found out where he was, it was 3 days later. Well, Gaspar said to move on them now. 33 hours and 16 minutes later, Gaspar got a call from Beebe. She said Ivan and Hans was dead, and several other radicals from the group died in the raid to kidnap Fritz. Ivan was tough, and him and Hans died during interrogation. Well, Fritz, on the other hand, didn't take too long to spill the beans. After 2 big toes and both thumbs was lopped off, he wanted to tell everything. Seemed like several shipments of crude come in on truck and train from Chavez and Caracas, Venezuela. It was held in Medellin at a cement plant and mixed with cases and cases of peanut butter. Well, Fritz said there was enough oil in the peanut butter to make the mixture suitable for the extract. He said the mixing had to make the peanut butter into a fine slurry, but would work fine. Hate to say this, but Fritz never seen the light of day after the operatives got all the information they could out of him. He was dispatched, as they say. Well, the information said that the trucks was waiting to be loaded to drive north to Monterrey, Mexico, and then on to Harlingen, Texas. They expected the extract would be put in the tankers immediately, but had no idea even if there was any extract. But Fritz seemed powerful sure that some of the extract was there and some already mixed in with the oil. Now them there loads was a trial run to see if it worked out as the predictions of the scientists said it would. If that was the case, there was only 72 hours till it would be released into the general population in Monterey and Harlingen. They had to move fast and coordinate their moves, and it would be fast and furious hitting all the locations at the same time. Well, it was showtime, and Buster and Grandpa Gus showed up at Buddy Bean Lumber Company at 9 a.m. the next morning. Grandpa Gus asked to see whoever was in charge and told the manager he was a friend of Buddy's. The feller called Buddy in Arkansas after he done told Buster and Grandpa Gus that Buddy wasn't there. Now, Buddy told the manager to put Grandpa Gus on the phone, and he did. Well, they visited for a spell, and then Grandpa Gus handed the phone back to the manager. And after he hung up, he told him that Buddy said to show him around and answer any questions they had. Well, the tour took them over the lumber yard and buildings, but one place was off limits. It was a right big building and had steam and the dangest odor you ever smelled coming from it. Well, Buster asked what was in there, and the manager said they was making veneer for furniture and process oils from the trees that was supposed to make cleaning compounds. Something like turpentine, he said. Said they couldn't go in there because of the safety reason. There was also a concrete block building that didn't have no windows off to the side but attached to the main building. Well, Grandpa Gus and Buster thanked the manager for the tour and left on out of there. Now they counted 22 hard cases that sure enough wasn't no lumberyard worker. They figured that there had to be some more in the building they didn't count on, and maybe some in the block building too. Whilst they was a-heading on back to the meeting place, Buster called in the report to Dalton. Dalton said that when they got back, they would go over the information Buster and Grandpa Gus got there. Then they'd go attack the lumberyard. Well, the attack went off as planned. Gaspar and Big Jim, Dubs, and Mac went in with a force of 40 men in a joint operation of the U.S. and French Special Forces. Delta Force and the French Foreign Legion, 3rd Foreign Infantry Regiment stationed in French Guiana, joined up to take down the bio factory there at Dakar at the docks. Well, Big Jim, Mac, and Dubs all drove heavy equipment. Big Jim drove a D-10 cat dozer, Dubs a cat crane with wrecking ball, and Mac a cat 345 excavator. During and after the fighting, them men folk tore that bio factory to the ground, demolished it so there's weren't nothing left bigger than a toothpick. Well, there wasn't a soul left alive neither. It was shoot to kill. When they was done, Gaspar and the menfolk rushed to the airport to get on back to Cayenne and Medellin. A C-130 took all of the soldiers, but Gaspar and the boys' paws went on a private jet. When they got to Cayenne, they split up. Mac stayed with Cecil and half of the soldiers, and Big Jim and Dubs took the other half with them to Medellin. Gaspar went to Medellin as well and left BB in charge in Cayenne. Now, whilst all that was going on, Dalton and Devane and the boys took on the terrorists at the lumber yard. There was 10 operatives and 20 of the Delta Force soldiers and 20 legionnaires raring for battle, and a battle it was, I tell you. First off, Walter done commandeered a huge forklift that was used to move logs. He took off towards that concrete block building faster than a dose of sauce through a mad winter woman. Walter tore through the backside of that building, going 90 to nothing. Just before he hit the darn thing, he let out a war whoop that would raise the day. Walter took out most of that wall and seen Uncle Jeff hanging there from chains. A feller was there in a chair guarding Uncle Jeff, and when Walter busted out the wall, he jumped up and started to shoot Walter. Walter turned the forklift on a dime and put one of them forks plumb through his gizzard. Walter slung him off with the fork and then got them forks up under the eye bolts holding the chains in the wall and pulled them out, just plumb out of the mortar, releasing Uncle Jeff. Walter hopped down from the forklift and grabbed Uncle Jeff, chains and all, and put him on the forklift and lit out of there in safety, quicker than you could bat an eye. Well, Uncle Jeff was awful poorly, but looked up to Walter and grinned. He muttered something about he knowed Walter done come for him when he heard that war whoop. When Walter got to where he was out of the line of fire, he took to tending to Uncle Jeff whilst the medic was a-coming to doctor him. Well, whilst Walter was a-saving Uncle Jeff, the soldiers was a-having a heyday with shooting them terrorists. There wasn't an innocent among them. They all knowed what they was a-doing and didn't plan on surrendering. It was kill or be killed. Well, now, you could tell how Devane got his name, the executioner, all right. He was a-taking out them terrorists right and left. There was plenty of them, too. Them 22 Peckerwoods Grandpa and Gus and Buster seed, 'tweren't nothing compared to what was in that building making and garden extract. Why, they was thicker than fleas on a dog's back. Dalton made Grandpa Gus and the boys stay back and let the soldiers do the fighting. Well, Grandpa Gus had his an old 45 out and was ready to shoot the first scoundrel that made a move. It was one heck of a ruckus, I tell you. Well, Jesse done spied the manager of the lumber yard headed to the office in a corner of the building. Now, he was up to no good for sure. Well, Jesse hollered to Hired and Buster that he was going after him and took off after him faster than greased lightning. Jesse always was fast. When Jesse got to the office door, he seen the manager at a panel of gauges. He was flipping switches and trying to turn a valve that seemed to Jesse to control the humdinger of a vat above their heads. But Jesse smelled the oil before he seen it in the main part of the building. He knowed it was the crude oil and peanut oil mixture. But that wasn't the half of it. That idiot sure enough was looking for leaving this here earth and taking everybody with him because he was about to release the extract into the oil mixture. Well, Jesse tackled the manager and took him to ground. That there manager was full-growed and wild-eyed as could be and outweighed Jesse by 130 pounds. Well, it didn't make no never mind to Jesse because he lit into that feller like a buzzsaw. But hard as he tried, Jesse couldn't whoop him. The manager pulled a knife and was about to pig stick old Jesse when Hired hit him with a 2x4 on his arm with the knife. Well, Buster was up on that manager and was going to thump him good, but tripped up on Jesse laying on the floor. What a sight. The manager reached for a pistol on the desk when Dalton come in and shot him right square twixt the eyes. Well, Dalton then turned off the switches and pulled the wires from him and called on his radio for some Delta Force soldiers to come in and guard that valve. Dalton got all the boys back under cover and began to get reports on the fighting. They didn't take one prisoner that day, not nary one. The terrorists wouldn't give up even if you let them. They was bound and determined to go down trying to take somebody with them. They was all brainwashed. They was all nuts. Just like these suicide bombers and Muslimators and all these crazy people today. Brainwashed. Well, Dalton and Devane had the soldiers to mop up what was left of the terrorists and then had a team come in that had what Buster calls zoot suits on. They was suits that protected the body from chemicals, hazmat suits they were, so as not to get nothing on them, and was using air packs for breathing too. Now don't think for a minute that some of the soldiers wasn't hurting or killed. They was. Devane was cut up a mite, had a flesh wound in his shoulder, thigh and calf. Man, oh man, that Devane was a fighting machine. It wasn't good to get on his and bad side, I tell you. 16 of the soldiers was wounded, and of that number, 4 was killed. Well, Dalton told the boys to watch what was going to happen to the extract. The hazmat team run hoses up to the extract vat and turned on the pumps. They sprayed everything in sight after squirting the vat, and you should have seen the sight that made. Dalton said that Mr. Holmes called him and told him the way to neutralize the extract was by putting hydrogen peroxide on it. Mr. Holmes said his and scientists found that the antidote to neutralize the extract was found out just a few minutes ago. Now there was foam and bubbles all over the place, and it done the job and made the place safe. Dalton said there would be a cleanup and disposal better than any Superfund project. U.S. and other top scientists would be there as soon as possible, and the site would be kept under guard till all traces of the building was burned or hauled out of there, even the dirt the building was sitting on. Well, that evening, Dalton and Devane got them all on a plane back to Cayenne. They got there just before midnight and went to Harry's bar for a bite and a drink. They deserved one after what they done been through that day. Well, Grandpa Gus said he was a mite wore down and hated on back to bed after he got some victuals into him. Dalton told them all he would give an update in the morning and see what they was going to do next. Well, when BBC Jessie, she come up to him and said she was proud he was back safe and sound. Now, they all stayed till Harry's closed up and caught up on the day's events. Well, Gaspar had called Dalton by that time, and the news wasn't good. Devane left on out as soon as he ate for Medellin by way of the Saramacca River in Suriname. Now, he took a contingent of soldiers with him to guard insertion points for the extract to be added to the oil mixture that Big Jim, Mac, Dubs, and Cecil found. Now, Cecil and Mac was already awaiting for Devane at the Saramacca River. When Devane got to the river, he seen where Mac and Cecil was pinned down with an engineer and 2 of the laborers. Them radical students was led by a mixture of Russian, Chinese, and Arab terrorists. Had to be nigh on to a dozen of them. They come in from upriver and through the jungle. Well, Mac and Cecil was a popping caps if they was going out of style. The only reason they hadn't been overrun is because the fight hadn't been going on for long and they had lots of ammo. Mac and Cecil didn't fall off no turnip truck, you know. I tell you, so they made sure they had bullets for their guns before they ever got there. Well, heck, fire gun ain't no gun without no bullets, they said. And Gaspar provided them with enough to last them a month. Well, Devane and the soldiers tore into them terrorists like nobody's business. You see, they wasn't expecting to see nobody at the river and wasn't no match for Devane and his men. The soldiers tried to capture as many as they could, but the hardcore leaders wouldn't have none of it. They was too fanatical and sooner die. Well, they got their wish, that's for sure. All of them bit to dust. But the students was a different story for the most part. They just run. Now, Manny and Odette was among the bunch that run off into the jungle. After Devane and his men finished up with the terrorists and put a guard on the students that give up, they began to search for the ones that run off. they found Manning and Odette about a mile away. Well, reckon they was scared and wore down and stopped to rest a bit, it looked like. A golden poison frog had been eating some meloride beetles and was squashed under the hand of Manning on the log they was sitting on. Now Odette was right smack dab in the middle of a nest of them beetles under the rotten log they was sitting on. And both of them gals was dead as a doorknob. Must have been a right painful death. Now Devane recovered some of the extract they was going to put in the pipe and called Dalton when everything was in hand. Dalton told Devane to put hydrogen peroxide in the container of extract as soon as possible, but to go on to the next location and see if any more terrorist teams was trying to make insertions of extract at the points discovered by the menfolk. Well, Dalton dispatched men all along the pipeline to cover all the possible insertion spots. After questioning several of the students and a Chinese terrorist, Devane found out that each insertion that was planned was on a timetable. All the oil from the two ships was to be sent through the pipeline, and depending on the calculating for the 72-hour window of the poison being effective was when the extract was to be put in. There were 17 different locations all along the pipeline, plus the one at the Saramacca River at Cayenne and Medellin. That made 20 in all. Well, Gaspar and Dubs and Big Jim had their hands full with dealing with them trucks rolling at the Monterey and Harlingen hauling the crude oil and peanut slurry. Peanut butter slurry, you know. Them fanatics was going to add the extract to the tankers when they got close to their destination. Well, Gaspar caught himself a raghead terrorist, one of them Muslimators, giving orders to some of the drivers of the rigs and took him off for questioning. Now, Gaspar had his ways to get what he wanted to know from folks, and it tweren't pretty neither, but he got it. This was life and death and war, for sure, and just wasn't no play nice with these fruitcakes, he said. Come to find out, there was 6 rigs plus the cement plant where the poison was going to be released. Medellin, Colombia, Monterey, Mexico, Harlingen, Texas, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, and Dallas, Texas. Now, Texas was the destination sites for the release of the poison. The rigs was also timed to be released for maximum kill penetration. Them nutcases was going to take out as many folks as they could and just couldn't see past their own hands as to how they was being used, and didn't give a hoot if they was used by the Bilderbergs or anyone else. Well, you could also bet your bottom dollar that they would turn on each other the first chance they got to. Now, Gaspar had Devane and his men take out the cement plant, and him and Big Jim and Dubs and some of Gaspar's operatives headed out to Monterey. In the meantime, Dalton was coordinating all the raids and ciphering all the information coming into him. Well, Jesse and Bebe met up the next day, and she told Jesse she sure enough fell for him, and no, they was from different worlds, but dearly wanted to get together after this was all over. Well, Jesse was eyeball to eyeball with that gal and told her he liked her better than anyone he'd been around, but just wasn't wanting to be marrying up anytime soon. Well, Bebe said she knowed they had to do some things, and he was a little young yet, but she just wanted Jesse to stay a part of her life. Oh boy, them pheromones of Jesse's done overpowered that gal something fierce. But the kicker was Jesse sure did cotton to that idea himself. Of course, y'all know he ain't ever met Monique yet. Well, Bebe had dark auburn hair, right shapely, and had the prettiest smile you ever did see. But it was them green eyes of hers that captured Jesse's heart and made it skip a beat. Buster told him that he'd meet a gal one day that was butter his and bread. She sure put old Jesse in a tailspin, I tell you. Anyhow, they come to a conclusion that they would definitely stay in touch and see each other when they could and just play it by ear, as they say. About that time, Walter sidled over and overheard what was being said by the two of them. Walter hollered over to him, said, "Ride that rocket, Jesse, ride the rocket." Well, Mac said that his and only son was happy as a lark and was making him proud as a mighty fine young man. Of course, Jesse's pa knowed Jesse wanted to take up lawyering and all, and didn't want to work for Southern Natural Gas. Well, when Jesse's Uncle Cecil heard that from his brother, he went off like a Roman candle and liked to blow the gasket. He told Mac he just couldn't let Jesse go off and not work for Sonat. Why, the whole family worked for him, and the deal with Sonat was to take care of them ever since they was getting gas from a well on their property. Heck, their family been with them from the start. Oh, me. Well, Cecil told Mac that Sonat would send Jesse to the university free of charge if he would just agree to work for him. Well, Mac told Cecil he just had to let Jesse be his own man and travel the path he chose. Maybe he might come to work one day, but that was Jesse's choice. Jesse didn't want to be beholden and controlled by nobody, and you just had to respect his decision. Well, that didn't sit well with Cecil, and he said he was bound and determined to get Jesse to commit to Sonat. You see, Cecil sure took a shine to Jesse, and he dearly loved Sonat, and he just wanted the boy to be a part of their lives, but it just wasn't meant to be. The future will tell them all that. Well, Buster and Grandpa Gus was a feeling right pert, and Grandpa Gus told Buster to not let any of the things he had to do bother him none. Buster told his and Grandpa Gus he was good with it, and he knowed Jesus, and Jesus would carry him through whatever come. He knowed life was important, but some folks made choices for you, it seemed, and you just had to roll with the punches. Grandpa Gus knowed Buster was going to be all right, and all these events wasn't going to haunt his boy's life. Plus, he had trained Buster all his life to respect life, but he had to choose right from wrong and good from evil. He always told Buster the feller that had the widest shoulders would have to tote the load. That's why you was born, and it was your purpose in life. Now, Hired, on the other hand, was wired higher than a Georgia pine, I tell you. He was always kind of like that, but he done come out of his shell. Heck, fire, he was ready for anything, and the excitement just added fuel to the fire. Hired was ready to tackle anything and ready and raring to go. Well, Dalton called them all together along with Beebe and told them they was a-leaving in 45 minutes. They was to meet Gaspar in Monterrey, Mexico as soon as possible. When Dalton and the rest of the bunch got to Monterrey, they met up with Gaspar, Big Jim, and Dubs and his crew. Well, Dalton, Devane, and Gaspar hashed it all out and decided to break up in teams and take out the big rigs hauling the oil. The extract was being transported in the tanker trucks and was to be added at a predetermined time by the driver. There was a switch that could be operated at any time to release the extract into the oil to activate the poison. The driver was supposed to do just that when he was told to, unless there was a problem, and then he would flip a switch right then and there at the first sign of trouble. Now, it was going to be mighty close stopping them trucks from releasing their poison load, but it had to be done no matter what. Now, Jesse and Beebe took the truck heading to Dallas. Buster and Gaspar took the one for Monterrey. Mac and Cecil took Harlingen. Walter and Dubs took San Antone. Hired and Big Jim got Austin, and Dalton, Devane, and Grandpa Gus got Medellin, and was to back up the rest of the teams. Well, it was all settled. Everybody knowed what to do. Any of the operatives and soldiers that was not engaged was to follow up after they took care of each target. This was like a leapfrog tactic to make sure each target was covered 6 ways from Sunday. 0 down, 6 to go. Gaspar and Buster followed the tanker truck up the mountains near Monterrey. The rig turned out to be an almost dead ringer for the one they was a-following. Well, Gaspar said they must have got on the trail of the wrong one at the truck stop at the bottom of the mountains. They had to do something fast. Well, there were some fellers paragliding from El Mirador, and they went up to them, and Gaspar started speaking Spanish to them. He told them that they needed their help, and would they rig him up with them parasails and bring their Ford Lobo back down the mountain for them and leave it at the police station. It was also the place they could pick up their chutes or be paid for any damages. Well, Gaspar used a pair of binoculars and located the truck they wanted. Well, Gaspar asked Buster if he was up for the ride, and Buster told him If and he was a-waiting for him, he was a-backing up. Buster got him a crash course in parasailing, and off they went. They made up the time they lost and then some. Well, Gaspar pointed out to Buster where he wanted to make their move on the truck, and it had to be in tandem. They was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, nothing but the wind in the sail. They'd both land on the tank, and one take the left side and one the right side of the truck. Now, Gaspar would take the driver's side, and Buster was supposed to get in on the passenger side and make sure the driver didn't hit the switch releasing the extract in the oil. Now, when old Gaspar got over the tanker, the driver was making his way up the mountain and pulling hard. Him going so slow made it a sight easier to land on it. Now, Gaspar went in first and released the chute and then helped Buster get down safe. Gaspar and Buster got there and was told that when he got into the cab not to let the driver flip any switch. Shoot first and ask questions later and don't worry none about it. Well, both of them made their way down the sides of the tanker and Gaspar got in position to take out the driver. When Gaspar made his move, Buster jumped in the cab and grabbed the wheel. Well, Gaspar shot the driver and got in the cab too. Everything went smooth as silk. Gaspar made a call to the police and had one of his men pick up the truck and take care of the fellers and let them have the chutes. Well, Gaspar and Buster took one of the operative's vehicle and left him there to guard the tanker till it was neutralized with the hydrogen peroxide. Now, Gaspar and Buster was hightailing it to a rendezvous with a helicopter to get to Harlingen. 1 down, 5 to go. Now, whilst Buster and Gaspar was doing their thing, Mac and Cecil was at a border stop for an immigration check. The driver was real suspicious, but went along with showing his papers. Now, orders was to shoot to kill without hesitation. There weren't no hollering to be put up their hands and reading the rights, no sirree. It was too darn dicey as it was to let a terrorist have the chance to release the extract into the oil. Now, whilst Mac was looking... Whilst Mac was looking at the driver's papers, Cecil plugged the fella right behind the ear. He just slumped over the steering wheel, dated a doornail before he could turn on the switch. Well, 2 down, 4 to go. Well, Jesse and Beebe was let out at a truck stop where the driver of the rig had to fuel up. He went on in to the restroom and got himself something to drink and paid for his fuel. When he come out and started to get back in the truck, Beebe sidled up to the driver and put them feminine wiles to work. Well, Jessie may have the pheromones, but she sure enough had the sex appeal. When he tried to get on in the truck, Beebe put her arm around his neck. Well, Jessie was real quiet-like and slipped up on the feller and put an ice pick in his brain right behind his right ear. Now, Jessie ain't never done nothing like this before, but what Beebe didn't know is that this here driver recognized her from Harry's Bar and from the opium den at the old hotel back in Cayenne. He was just about to put a knife in her ribs when Jessie up and killed the Russian terrorist. Well, Beebe and Jessie stayed there about 40 minutes till reinforcements come and impounded the tanker and dismantled the switch. And more hydrogen peroxide was used to end the threat of the poison being discharged, and then they went to meet up with the others. 3 down, 3 to go. At the same time Jessie and Beebe was taking their driver out of play, Walter and Dubs got in a fracas of their own. Dubs had an enlarged prostate and had to use the restroom real bad. Now, Dubs told Walter he done tied it in a knot and was using the cork to boot. Said to find him a bathroom or just stop on the side of the road, he didn't care, he had to go. Well, Walter pulled into a rest area this side of San Antonio and let Dubs out to use the facilities. Well, Dubs never seed such hair on a cat, I tell you. He done seed the driver of the tanker coming in to use the bathroom too. Oh, Walter spied him about that time too and come a-running. Now, the driver must have had a bellyache because he had the loo smelt up so bad it would have gagged a gopher. Dubs done motioned to Walter that the driver was in the stall next to the wall. Well, Dubs asked Walter if he reckoned they ought to try to take him alive for questioning since he weren't nowhere near the switch. Well, Walter told his and Paul that he reckoned so. Walter was going to call Gaspar and Dalton, but he just heard the toilet paper roll being pulled on. Then come the first flush. Well, Walter had to act real quick. He reached up under the partition and grabbed the driver's legs. Dubs kicked the door in and waylaid the feller with the roundhouse and tore his head right off. Walter and Dubs was a-sitting on the driver whilst a-calling in to Gaspar and Dalton. Now, Dalton was a mite busy at the time, and Gaspar was close by in the helicopter. He said to hold down the fort till he got there, and he'd make all the arrangements to impound the tanker. A hazmat crew brung the hydrogen peroxide and dismantled the switch like the other tankers. Gaspar landed in the parking lot and told Walter and Dubs to head on back to the rendezvous point. Well, as Gaspar was a-loading up the raghead driver, he done come to his senses and then started hollering something awful, and then he up and slathered at the mouth and keeled over Daler and the mackerel. Feller had a poison capsule of cyanide in his tooth and bit it and killed himself. Walter told Gaspar and Dub both them fellers was plumb crazy and off of their rockers. Dying fast was too good for them. They needed hanging. 4 down, 2 to go. Well, Hired and Big Jim got a mite sidetracked and lost the tanker truck for about 20 minutes. Now, Big Jim Hired and told Hired he knowed these roads and knowed of a shortcut to Austin. Well, Hired took a farm road that Big Jim directed him to, and that was a back way into Austin that come out by the airport. Well, Hired was pouring the coal to that Ford with the police interceptor engine. He hit 140 miles an hour, but the road wouldn't allow him to keep that up, well, that kind of speed up for long. They come to an overpass, but there was no exit onto the freeway. Well, Hired hit the embankment just like the state troopers do and got on the freeway with the pedal to the metal. Highway 77 to I-37 to I-35 was the route that had to be taken to make up any time at all from Harlingen to Austin. That 277-mile run was taking a toll on Big Jim as he was fretting on finding that tanker truck. About the time they hit town, they was pretty low, but just as they was passing the Austin-Bergstrom Airport, they seen the tanker pulled up to a cargo dock. Well, Hired and his pa both pulled their 40 Glocks they was packing with their laser sights, and they knowed how to use them too. Well, they shot enough varmints back home to prove up their mettle using any kind of rifle, pistol, or shotgun. Well, Hired pulled in and give himself room for cover before he got out the car. Big Jim had Hired report to Gaspar of what was happening. Gaspar said if the tanker was already in Austin, that it was bound to be soon for the poison to be released. They had to move and be quick about it, said Gaspar. He said since he knowed their location, he'd send for some help. Well, Big Jim eased up to the cab of the tanker and looked in to see if the switch was on or off. Well, it was off. Big Jim opened the door real quiet like, pulled the wires loose from the switch under the dash so you couldn't tell it wouldn't operate. Well, meanwhile, Hired opened the door to the warehouse and went in, but hid for a minute or two till his eyes got adjusted to the dim light. Well, Hired waited for his pa, and when he got up to Hired, said, "Let's take our time since the extract can't cause no harm right now." Big Jim wanted to ease around and find the driver and put him out of commission, but safely. He didn't want Hired to get hurt none and him get shot neither. Well, after a bit, they heard music and talking in the back of the warehouse where they hated on out that way, but real careful like. The driver was a Russian and 2 other fellers was in the room with him. They was having a drink and said they sure wasn't going to release the extract till they could get out of there safe and sound. All agreed to that and wanted their pay for the job. They was waiting for word when they was to be picked up at the airport. Well, that suited Hired and Big Jim just fine and planned to wait there for their backup to get there and to let them take them fellers alive. Seemed like they would talk aplenty if you caught them and give them a little of Gaspar's incentive. You gotta remember, these fellers had killed and didn't have an innocent bone in their body. They killed for blood money, not conviction. Well, about that time a cat was chasing a rat and sure enough surprised both Hired and Jim. They like to fell over each other and made a racket loud enough to be heard over the music that was playing. Well, that got the attention of the three fellers in the room. They came a-busting through the door with guns drawn and looking for something to shoot. Well, Hired snapped a shot at the first feller through the door, but only wounded him. Big Jim took out the next one with a bullet in the throat. Then both Big Jim and Hired pumped 3 rounds apiece into the last feller a-wielding 2 Uzis. He died on the spot. Now the wounded feller was the Russian driver. Hired creased his skull with the pretty parted his hair you ever saw. Well, sir, they trussed him up real tight and called Gaspar back and told him what had happened. The Gaspar said help was on the way, and when they got there, to head on back to the rendezvous point. Just leave the car and he'd have a helicopter pick them up. 5 down, 1 to go. Well, Dalton Devane and Grandpa Gus was the first to get to their tanker truck secured. It was plain out and out easy. The driver was nowhere to be seen, and they simply went to the truck, disabled the switch, and removed the extract. Simple, really. Son, you talk about a firefight, there sure was a genuine war that took place when Dalton's team went back to their LZ. All the Delta Force and Legionnaires was gathered up in that one place, as well as Dalton's men and Gaspar's operatives that was left there. There was a spy that told the terrorists their whereabouts, and they was a-laying for them. Now come to find out that the Colombian drug cartel got hooked up with the Russian and Chinese bunch. They didn't seem to care much for the Arabs, though. There must have been 75 or 80 of them, but they just didn't know how hard them boys could scrap, I tell you. Dalton and his team and the soldiers was outnumbered 2 to 1, but they kicked the living daylights out of them outlaws and terrorists. Now, when the shooting finally stopped, the outlaws was shot up pretty good, but some escaped, and the terrorist was killed with no mercy. Take no prisoners was the order of the day, and it didn't make no never mind, and if it was a man, woman, or child, they left in a pine box. And Grandpa Gus said he had a high old time and put a few notches on his gun. Now that old 45 was a busting caps as fast as Grandpa Gus could pull the trigger. Devane told Buster later ain't no telling how many clips he went through. Dang near melted the barrel down to a nub. 6 down, none to go. Did you forget Hannah, the Czech gal that took a shine to Buster? She was there at the rendezvous point in Brownsville, Texas. She was an expert in meteorology and electromagnetic frequency waves. She wasn't 20 but 30 and was working with Dalton and Devane and Uncle Jeff. The suspected culprits was the Rothschild Mafia. They used mercs and fringe radical groups to do their dirty work. They was behind the scenes kind of Peckerwoods. The focus on the mission dealt with clandestine weather modification. It is done by continuous high-speed computing, generating tolerable, accurate, short-range predictions of 1, what will happen without intervention, and 2, what will happen towards the desired event given a fitted trial intervention. Well, folks, this is a lot of mumbo-jumbo here, but it has to do with changing up of the weather and doing things like that. Floods and hurricanes and whatnot. Well, that's another story in itself. Well, everyone met in Brownsville at the Federal Building in the CIA office. Uncle Jeff was going to be all right and was already sent back to his station. They couldn't tell where that was, but Dalton said he would be to visit Walter and the folks soon. Devane would get over his wounds and was already doctored up. Boy, is that feller tougher than nails. Jessie and Bebe was going to spend some time together when she come to visit after she was debriefed. Well, Grandpa Gus and Buster, Hired and Big Jim, Mac and Cecil, Walter and Dubs was all fitter than a fiddle, not near a scratch on them. A debriefing was to be had when Dalton and Devane come to Buster's house if and that was all right by the rest of them. Of course, all of them said yes to that. Well, travel arrangements was made to leave out immediately to get everybody back home seeing how the women folks was a-worrying and the boys and men folk was really ready to see them. Hiram Holmes called all of the boys and the men folk and told them how great a service they done for their country, pardon me, and how proud of them he was, and said he just couldn't thank them enough. Everything has settled down now, and Uncle Jeff come for his visit, and Dalton and Devane debriefed them all, and Bebe took a little vacation with Jessie and his folks, and even to visit her people in Savannah, Georgia, where she is from. There ain't nothing left to be said but all's well that ends well, and it has. Y'all have a blessed day. It's Old Buster signing out.